I'm in the glory land where I'm in the glory land where. Joel, so I promise that you didn't miss anything from the first parts. But we're going to go over another hero of faith this morning, and his name is Barak. And that may be not how you say it. Sorry, that's how I'm going to say it this morning. I apologize if you say it some other way. That's fine, because I'm probably also saying it wrong. So, uh, over in Hebrews chapter 11, that's kind of the heroes of faith chapter. They go over these incredible people in the Bible, and then kind of at the end of these verses, they kind of throw in like a clump of these people that we don't talk about too much. And I think Barak here is one of those people that we don't really think about too much. Now, if I said another pivotal character from his accounts, you'd probably recognize that name. And I'm going to get to that. But he is the one that is listed in Hebrews 11. So that's what we're going to focus on this morning. And as we've done with the other lessons in the series, we're going to talk about who he is, or he was, I should say, what did he do, and then some lessons for us that we can apply to our lives. Because he was an Old Testament character repeated in the New Testament, and I would like to know why. Because if something's repeated by a teacher, usually it's because it's going to be on a test or kind of important for you. And this man was repeated. It's like, well, why? And that's what I want to explore this morning. So before we get into that, though, I want to list off some important people of his accounts that we're not too lost in the verses when we kind of see them come up. First off is Deborah. She was a prophetess and a judge of Israel, the only female judge mentioned in the Bible during that time. And you've probably heard of Deborah. That's probably the name that makes more sense to you. And I was actually trying to look up kind of pictures for what Barak would have looked like. Now, granted, they would have been totally wrong, but almost all of them had Barak and Deborah side by side. So they're kind of like a duo in the account that you'll think of. And I remember Deborah way more than I remember Barak just personally. Second is Jabin. He's the king of Canaan. He's the new guy kind of in town, taking over the Israelites. He kind of he's got them all kind of under his thumb right now, because the book of Judges here is a time when Israel would follow God for a while, then they would not do that. God would send in an oppressor to kind of get them down. A judge would come save them, and this roller coaster of things. And Jabin now is the man kind of going against him. His right hand man is this man named Sisera. He's the commander of the Canaan army. And he's our main villain this morning, if you will. He's the main guy going against Barak. He's the leader of the other team, basically. And then we have this man, Heber the Kenite, who's a far off descendant of Israel, actually, but he is now an ally of Sisera. And we'll see that he kind of plays a role in, I don't want to spoil it, but he does some things for the enemy, if you will. And finally, we have Jael, Heber's wife, and other things, but I don't want to spoil the ending. So we'll get to that later. But she is also a critical role. So these are kind of our other important people other than Barak as we go over these people. So just it's good to know who we're going to be talking about this morning. And so who was he? Over in Hebrews chapter 11 verses 32 to 34 it says, "And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell you righteousness, obtain promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight." And so this verse is kind of what inspired this whole series that I've been making, because these guys are just kind of listed off, and then a lot of pretty incredible things from 33 and 34 mentioned. It's like, well, like what specifically did they do, and which things kind of attribute to these people? I've highlighted a couple that I believe kind of Barak kind of epitomized kind of the best, and that's that from weakness we're made strong, and he put foreign armies to flight. That's just my personal opinions. He could probably fall into any number of these categories if you kind of want to look at it through a different lens. But those are the two big ones I think that kind of apply to Barak this morning. And so, who was he? Back in Judges chapter 4 here, we kind of see his account. And if you want to open your Bible to Judges 4, if you like following your Bible, most of today's sermon is going to come from Judges 4. So Judges 4, verses 6 and 7 says, "She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands." And so here we see kind of a twofold thing. We see who he is and what tribe he's from. It's not the most prominent of tribes. He's from the tribe of Naphtali. And he's just a guy there, but he's been commanded by God. And the she here that is kind of telling these things is Deborah. And so the verses before this, verses 4 and 5 from Judges 4, says, "Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lepiddoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. And you might be thinking, well, this is like, who was he? I don't think Barak would have been the person he was without Deborah in his account here. And we'll see that as he goes through it. But Deborah was kind of the person, the judge here to save them. But during that time, she wasn't the one they saw to lead the army. She's like kind of summoned Barak and was like, you're going to have to fight the Sisera guy. God has commanded you to do that. I'm telling you his command, go do it. And so we see that he is like a chosen man from God. And Deborah kind of gave him the info that he needed. So who was he? He was called a hero of faith in the New Testament. That's kind of what led to this whole study of why we're even looking at him. And he was a son of Abinoah from Kadesh and Naphtali. That shows the tribe he was from. And then Deborah was his partner in faith, if you will. If he's the hero of faith, she was the partner there right behind him. She was a judge there. She was the one who kind of led him on to help him do all the things that he did. And so we'll dive into what did he do. In Judges 4, verses 8 and 9, it says, Barak said to her, if you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. Certainly I will go with you, said Deborah, but because of the course you are taking, the honor will your choice in your action. So kind of an odd start to our hero of faith here. So we'll continue. In verse 11 here, it says, now Heber the Kenite had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree in Zananim near Kadesh. And so another player is involved here. Heber the Kenite kind of comes into play. And he's important because the verse after this, he kind of gives Sisera some information. He's like, I saw where Barak is going. I saw him go up to the mountains. And Sisera's like, great, I will go take him out. Thank you for the info. So it's odd because, once again, he's a descendant of Moses, if you will. He should be related to the Israelites in some fashion. Far off now at this point, I get it. But he's kind of turned coat on them and is kind of for the enemy, if you will. And we'll see what happens. Continuing on to verses 14 and 15, there it says, then Deborah said to Barak, go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak went down Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword, and Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. And so the reason that Canaan could oppress them so easily was because they had 900 chariots in their command. And you might be thinking that's nothing today. Back then, that was incredible. That was the force to be reckoned with. They had the superior army. It's no question they should have won the fight. And once again, they're on a mountaintop here. They had the high ground, if you will, and he went down from there. It doesn't make sense to go down from a superior position to face an army that has better artillery, better better fighters, better technology. He gave that up though, because now I believe that he's like, okay, the Lord's with me. I trust in the Lord now. I'm willing to go. And this is where I think, in my opinion, Barak kind of turns it around a little bit, because he did give up all those things that make sense. This makes sense to me, right? As long as we've seen from military tactics and Star Wars, the high ground matters. It matters, and you don't want to give that up. He did do that though, because he's like, I believe he had a turning point. He was like, I trust in God here. Deborah's once again confirmed it for him. So maybe if Deborah wasn't there, he wouldn't have done this. But he still was willing to give up that position and go for it. So he did have enough faith here now to be in God to be like, I'll go and take him on. And he beat him. He chased all of their men down, got him on. Then Sisera's kind of fleeing on foot here. He's given up his chariot. He's gone. He's scared and he's running right now. So let me jump to verses 17 and 18 from Judges 4. It says, Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid. So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. So here we see Jael come into the account. She's like, I got safe harbor for you. Come over here. It's fine. You can stay in here. Which, first off, back then was a very odd thing to do. Random men didn't enter the tents of other people's wives. It was odd. It was very odd at the time. But she's like, don't worry. There's an alliance here. Like people will never look for you here. It's kind of what she's like. Okay, and like I think that's why he was going there. It's like kind of hiding in a place when they don't expect to find you. And she's like, I got you. I'll cover you with the blanket. It's fine. And so here we see this like, oh man, Jael's fighting for the enemy again. She's come back here. Verses 20 and 21 happen though. And it says, stand in the doorway of the tent, he told her. If someone comes by and asks you, is anyone in there? Say no. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground and he died. Pretty, pretty crazy turn of events, I would say. And honestly, the account doesn't really give a reason for this kind of change of heart in her because it seems like they should have had an alliance. It seemed like she was actually going to safe harbor, but instead, she broke all the customs of that day, finished them off. And probably back when we were first in the beginning, which is why I didn't want to tell you what Jael did in the beginning, because the first time you hear it, it's crazy. But you would think that the woman's hand that the Lord was going to deliver them into would have been Deborah's. At least that's what I thought, because that makes logical sense. Like Deborah was the judge at the time; she was the prophetess of the land. That's clearly the woman she's referring to. No, no. Jael is the one who ultimately defeated Sisera, who was the leading commander of Canaan. And defeating that person didn't automatically mean like king of Canaan before the Israelites. And the hand of the Israelites pressed harder and harder against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. So, like I said, this wasn't just an instant like, oh, he got defeated. Israel's free now. No, no, no. But this was absolutely the turning point. And it's all because of this woman, Jael, really. She's the one who finally caught this leader. And as we can see from just modern day fights and things, the leader of a nation or the leader of a group or the boss, if they leave, things can kind of crumble, right? If you take the head of the snake off, then it's not a threat anymore. And that's kind of what was happening here. And it all was because of Jael. And so what did he do? He only wanted to go if Deborah did. Not a great start. He didn't seem to have the faith in God that he should have. Heber gave up Barak to Sisera. He was kind of betrayed by someone who should have been a descendant of Israel. Ideally would have been on Israelite side. And then Barak gives up the high ground to go fight. So he finally gives up this position that makes sense to us and seems to have this faith in God that God will see him through the fight. And then Jael gives Sisera a safe hiding place, but then tent pulls him in the temple. He kind of real quick turnaround there. And then this victory ultimately led to the fall of Jabin, the king of Canaan. This was the turning point that kind of led them to that. And then Deborah and Barak then sing a song over in Judges 5. It should be noted that the whole chapter is kind of like their recounting of the whole tale. This happens in Old Testament times. I know it seems kind of silly for me to say it now, and I almost didn't put this point in because it sounds kind of ridiculous, but they have a whole account of like kind of what happened. And so you're probably thinking, well, like that's it. That's our hero of faith. I know. I'm getting to the applications for us, but that's the account. And I haven't studied it like a ton until I was putting this lesson together, but I just wanted to go over it because it is kind of interesting. And I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention things from Judges 5. So I'm going to give us some highlights here. You can read it in its entirety. I didn't find any music to it, so I'm not going to sing it for you or anything, but I'm going to give you some high points from it that kind of fill in some blanks here too. God made it rain, which kind of ruined the chariots in verse 4 we see. So I think the reason he was able to come down and defeat those chariots because the chariots should have ran over the people. It doesn't matter who they were. The chariots should have won the day. God caused kind of the river to kind of flood and caused rain to fall, which kind of ruined the chariots' advantage. So God absolutely helped in this fight, and Barak had enough faith that God would provide something like that. At this point, Israel was scared and disarmed. So they were living in this spot where no Israelites had any weapons. The verses talk about them not having any weapons available, and their lives were miserable. They needed someone to come in and kind of save them. And then the song encourages the leaders to recount what God did. And mostly the song is attributed to Deborah, I should say. Barak's kind of thrown in there, but it's most likely that Deborah was kind of the author here. But she then is encouraging the leaders to recount what God did, not what she did, not what Barak did, but what God did for the people. And that's really cool that she was able to shift kind of that, like to know truly where the battle victory came from. And then the tribes are called out for helping or not, as we see over here. Naphtali was huge in helping, and some tribes though didn't follow the summons of battle here, and they're absolutely called out for just sitting around on their boats or sitting on the shore, just staying there. So they're not pulling any punches about who kind of helps in this situation. And even a city specifically of Meroz was cursed for not helping. They were like, this city specifically in Naphtali did not come. So it's very interesting to kind of see what this song was about. And then Jael was praised, and they reflected on Sisera and like the people that remained from him. So there's a lot of things that went in this song, but ultimately there was final praise to God in the end for this battle. So that's a very quick highlight of the song from Judges 5. It's part of the account, so I didn't want to skip over it, so you have kind of a complete picture of like what happened there. But then some lessons for us that I think we can take from this, and that's that God uses women for His work. That's hopefully obvious, but I just wanted to laser point out that, or just focus on it for a second. So over in Acts chapter 10, verse 34, it says, "Then Peter began to speak. I now realize how true it is that God does not show favoritism." And then over in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 28, it says, "There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." And so just wanted to point out, because I think sometimes we can overlook the value that women have in serving God in his work. And this isn't a whole lesson about that, so I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I just want to point out that God doesn't show favoritism. He doesn't care. We're all the same before Christ, and He'll use anyone He can to accomplish His will and His work. It doesn't matter. And I think sometimes that we just overlook women get overlooked in their service to the Lord because of the roles that we play. And those are different things, and they're defined elsewhere. Once again, that's for a whole nother sermon. I just want to point out this is an incredible example from Old Testament time where arguably, in my opinion, the two women should have been mentioned in Heroes of Faith as opposed to Barak potentially. Certainly Deborah, I guess Jael maybe. There commentaries I think speculate why she kind of changed her tune there when she's like, "I'll give you safety," and then absolutely did not. I'm not going to speculate. That's not what I'm here for. That's what she did. She accomplished God's will. And I think that's a huge message for us too, that God will use any method possible to accomplish His will. And it can be the terrible things in your life. It can be the good things in your life. God will use it. And God did that throughout the whole book of Judges. If you look at it as a whole, He didn't come and just like wipe out His children. He sent a neighboring country that was in power at that point. That means that He profited some evil person in that time to take them over so that they could dispense justice for God. And I think that's a huge takeaway for us, because we may be asking ourselves, well, why is that person succeeding in life? They're not a Christian. They don't believe in God. They don't. Maybe God's trying to use them for some purpose. Just maybe look at it from that perspective. Just realize God uses all sorts of things to accomplish His work. And the next, fear is an enemy of faith. Over in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "For the Spirit of God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." And then over in 1 John chapter 4, verse 18, it says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love." And I think that Barak was scared to go fight them. He needed more comfort here from Deborah. He's like, "I need you to come with me, because I don't think I can pull this off." He was timid in his faith to God at that point. He just wasn't willing to commit 100% fully and trust in God and have that faith in Him that we need to have. And I think we can do the same thing today, where we can have like 75% faith in God and be like, "I trust Him, but like maybe I can get some backup, or maybe I can insurance myself." It's all or nothing when you're following God. You have to be willing to give all of yourself to Him. And if you have any fears or anything, that's an enemy of that. It can keep you back from and hold you back from fully following God and doing what He would want you to do. And it's tough to give up 100% and 100% of your trust and faith into someone, but I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking you to do that to God. Not certainly not to me. Please do not put faith in me. I promise I'm going to try my best to not let you down, but I will in some fashion. I because I'm a person. That doesn't mean that I won't feel bad about it. I can apologize, but God will never let you down. So we have to be willing to put in 100% of our faith into Him. And that's how we kind of get rid of this fear here, because perfect love drives out fear, and God is love. And finally, God humbles the proud. If you look over in James chapter 4 and verse 10, it says, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up." Then over in Romans chapter 12 and verse 16, it says, "Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited." I put this in here because I think that Sisera and Jabin thought that they had the mightiest army in the land, that they would never be defeated, and they were soundly put in their place from a very unlikely source, as we brought up with jail. But God will humble the proud, and we need to humble ourselves. And I think I mentioned this before, but I think humility is a difficult thing to acquire because you can't really brag about having it because then you kind of lost it. And so it's a very difficult thing to be willing to humble yourselves, be like, thank you, I appreciate that. Thanks for that help. I got it. And then also don't think of yourself as being higher than anybody else. Even it doesn't matter your position in life or how successful you've been or things, you cannot look down on people because of that. And um, I think that for me, what helped kind of solidify that in my mind was working in high school as a busboy at a country club. You don't get much lower than that in life and station, and it gave me perspective that I think you can apply to your Christian lives too, because recognize that the only difference between us and here is that we are redeemed sinners and the rest of the people are just sinners. They're just missing the redemption part. And the best part is we didn't do the redemption part. Like I didn't redeem myself. That was Jesus. Jesus came in and purified and sanctified me and gave me this opportunity to be in a different situation. Otherwise, we're the same as everybody else. And so if you look at it from my perspective, I don't think you can be conceited in your Christian life. That doesn't mean that you won't be, but I think that you just need to examine yourself and kind of take a look at that. So this in review of some lessons for us. God uses women in his work, obviously from this Old Testament account and from New Testament verses as well. Fear is an enemy of faith. It's something that will counteract your faith. And then God humbles the proud. So make sure that we humble ourselves first because that will cause him to lift us up. And finally, in conclusion, I know Barak was not your typical hero of faith. He didn't come in like a David defeating Goliath or something incredible like that. He came in at first very timid, very nervous, and he ultimately did win the day, though. He struggled with his faith, but ultimately won his fight. He had a lot of encouragement from Deborah, a lot of help from her and other people in there, but he ultimately did have that faith to kind of go in and fight a battle that seemed unwinnable, and he came out on top. Ultimately had that final faith, and I think that's the biggest takeaway from him is that it doesn't matter where you start with your faith. If you're timid at first, eventually he found his faith in God, and we can do the same thing. I encourage you to do that too. And we can learn a lot from his account. These are just the simple takeaways that I had, but there's plenty others in there. But if you've been struggling in your life in any way,